Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. I'm a little bit croaky again today. We've been moving a lot of hay of late, and I think I might have hit that lovely period in Australia where we all suddenly have hay fever. So I will be slurping on some tea while I'm talking. And it's episode 133 episodes in, and we are deep in goat month. Goat 2 month, by month. What do you call 2 months instead of monthly? Bi-monthly? No, because that seems like twice a month. Anyway, goat shelters and fencing is our topic for this week. And it's one that I think a lot of people, they go two ways with. They either go hell for leather and go crazy insane building these Taj Mahal palaces for their goats, or they don't put any shelters in at all. So we're going to try and hit a nice, happy, middle of the road kind of process here. And hopefully we will come up with a plan that works for everybody. So before I get started, we are awaiting with bated breath the kidding of Poppy, who is a very dear goat to us. She was a granddaughter of my oldest goat, who was my favourite. I know you're not supposed to have favourites, but she was my favourite. She was the granddaughter of her, and she lost her mother to mastitis when she was probably about 5 days old. So she was hand-reared as a bottle baby. The mastitis, we did treat it. I know it feels like, I'm sure sometimes I feel like when I talk about my goats, everybody goes, you've lost so many goats. Well, goats do have interesting ways of trying to kill themselves, let me tell you. But they also do require a certain level of vet care. And we did get the vet involved with the mastitis, which was some 3 years ago now. We did get the vet involved with that, with the mastitis, and we were unable to fix it. And mastitis isn't always curable. People think, oh, if you get the vet involved and there's antibiotics going in, then you must be able to fix it. There are different types of bacteria that cause mastitis, and in this particular case, it was just not responding to antibiotics, and there was nothing. In the end, the vet said the only thing he could do was remove the udder of the goat. Now, my goats are not purebred, papered, super expensive goats. And so we do have a cap limit that we have on what we will spend at the vet. And in this case, it would have not been practical, and there was no guarantee she would have survived having the mastectomy anyway. But with what it was going to cost for that, it was not viable to do that. So Poppy is due to explode with kids any day, and she has been in the birthing suite, getting a higher level of food and grain after what happened with poor Sagey the other week. Now that we know that the hay that we were getting was not quite at standard, and it just didn't have the right nutrients in it, and I did not realise that. And I do realise it now. I knew the hay wasn't great, but I didn't think it was causing that many issues. Clearly it was. Anyway, we have had a rather hectic week because we are now, the handy helper and I, and the handy helper works full-time shift work. So he has been off at work, and I have been on bottle baby duty for the last 2 weeks. And when he gets home, he does help me with that. But we feel like we're parents to newborns again, and it's a little bit hectic. Sorry, just had to stop for a little sip of tea. I'm super croaky, and it really is in Canberra, or the surrounding area of Canberra, we get significantly high levels of pollen, and a lot of people suffer from hay fever. And I don't normally suffer from hay fever, but this year I seem to be copping it. Both kids are too. Anyway, goat shelters and fencing. Let's discuss it. So you're thinking about getting a goat. You've got, we'll say 2 to 5 acres, and you want to get goats, possibly to have 2 little goats as milkers and breed them, and, maybe either eat the meat off the offspring or sell the offspring as pets or meat, which is what most people do. Now, when I say that, I should do a whole episode on just what happens when you have an oversupply of goats. Don't go into it assuming that you're going to be able to sell every offspring as a pet. You have to accept the fact that whoever you sell the animal to, and this is for all livestock, I've seen so many people advertise cows for sale, and they're like belted Galways or Highland cattle, and they go, I'm prepared to sell them, but only as pets. And it's like, you do realise that the person buying them can do with them whatever they choose to do. You can't put a stipulation on that. If the person pays you the amount you're asking and takes the goats, the sheep, the cows away to their property, and they then own the livestock, if they then choose to butcher them and eat them, I guess you're just going to have to suck that shit up, because it really is up to the buyer what they decide to do with that livestock. Now, the number of times I've seen it advertised with belted Galways in particular in this area, they're very prominent here, and people get them and don't realise they actually have to maintain them, and then they want to sell them, but they want to sell them as pets because they don't want to think about them going to a butcher's. And it's just, it does my head in a little bit. It's like, okay, people, you haven't quite worked out how that farming thing works yet, have you? Anyway, so don't think that you're going to raise goats and be able to sell all of them as pets. You do have to accept the fact that if you are bringing baby goats into the world, that there is a chance that those baby goats will end up going into the food supply. And that's more than okay. 90% of the world eats meat from ruminant animals because it's what we're designed to as humans. I'll get off my high horse now, off my rant. Anyway, so what we need to look at is you've got 2 to 5 acres, you're thinking about getting a couple of goats. What do you need to know and what do you need to think about before you get the goats? That's the really important bit, before you get the goats. Please do not be trying to do fencing and housing after the goats have arrived. If you know you're going to get goats, start planning now. Start planning before you even look at the goats to see what kind of fencing you need, what kind of shelter you need, and get it all set up before you pick up your goats. So, that having been said, you've got your goat home. What kind of fencing do you need? Well, we'll go through shelter first and then we'll go through fencing. So, shelter has to be dry and draft free. Now, some goats are okay in the rain. Some goats don't mind being out in the rain. What I have found is my fibre goats, so my Angora goats, who I don't milk predominantly, I have milked them if I've had to take colostrum to give to kids, but I don't milk them for human consumption because they don't have a lot of milk. They tend to be fine out in the rain. It could be pissing down rain and they will literally lie down and sleep and not worry about it. They're a bit like the Miramar, how she sleeps in puddles when in the middle of the rain. It doesn't bother them as much. My milking goats, who have shorter, finer coats, thinner skin, they're not fibre goats, their hair is not their predominant feature. They hate the rain. They literally loathe the rain. Hazel, my oldest, who was Willow's sister, she will go nuts if she cannot get into a shelter and it's raining, like scream the house down kind of thing. She hates being out in the rain. So you do need to have a dry shelter for milking goats because I'm going to say it, milking goats are more fussy and more finicky about being out in the weather. So, dry and draft free. The reason draft free is because if you have a goat that comes into a shelter and it's damp or wet, moist, I'm going to say that word that everybody hates, if they are already wet from being out in the rain, having a draft-free shelter means that they can utilise their own body heat to dry themselves off and not catch a chill. Now, that being said, I've never had a goat die from pneumonia or from any kind of chest infection. I've had a horse die from pneumonia, but she was also 27 years old, and more than likely there was a few other issues going on there too. But goats, I've never had one get sick from a flu, a cold, a virus in their chest or anything like that. But it will weaken them and they will not be able to cope with other things that may occur for them if their immune system is down. So draft free so that they have an area where they can dry off, sit down. They literally sit and huddle together in most cases. That's why goats are herd animals. They'll huddle together. Their hair is designed to repel a certain amount of water. Certainly when I've had to wash goats before, and I have had to wash them, particularly my does when they kid, I'll wash around their back end afterwards because they can get quite goopy and gunky around the back end with the afterbirth. Their hair is hard to get water into. So they are designed to repel a certain amount of it, but being in a draft-free environment that's dry means that they can then utilise their own body heat and the body heat of the other goats around them to dry themselves off completely. So we want it not windy or drafty, but we do want it ventilated. Now, the best way that the Handy Helper and I have come up with doing this is by putting a little gap high up underneath the roof space of the shed. So we just build little portable sheds that we can move around into different yards. They're literally made out of pallets with corrugated iron on top. And we usually will put some corrugated iron on one or two sides, and those sides are the sides that for us in the southern hemisphere, we face to the southwest because that's where our cold winds come from. In the northern hemisphere, I would believe it would be the northeast. You would be facing your shady side towards, so the side that's going to block most of those cold winds out of. But you do want ventilation. So a little gap between the roof space and the wall space, just so that some breeze can go through there. Now, this is important in both winter and summer. In winter, for ventilation, you don't want the body heat of like 5 goats to build up a condensation level where it's damp and moist and a bit bacterially. I don't even know whether that's a word, but you know what I mean. Damp, moist areas never are as healthy as clean, dry areas. Now, you can't keep it clean all the time. We're talking about goats. They shit like no tomorrow. I've just cleaned out Poppy's birthing suite. I've been cleaning it out every day, and oh my god, that goat can shit for Australia. I don't know where it all comes from because there's less food going in and more shit coming out than I've ever seen before. But you can't keep it clean, but you can keep it dry and well ventilated, and that will help cut down ailments and immune system issues that the goats will have. In summer, you want it well ventilated because if you've got 5 goats in there trying to get out of the heat of the sun, they're going to want a breeze coming through. Otherwise, that shed is going to get baking hot real quick. So a small gap for ventilation. You can also, if you've got a completely closed in space, as something that we use with the chicken coops, is we put a plastic ventilation like screen that you can buy at Bunnings or at any hardware store, that you put into rooms like your bathroom that allow air to escape in and out without a draft coming into the room. And we just place them, we'll cut out a little section in the corner of the shed and put it in there, and it just helps with that airflow. The next thing you're going to need is either a raised bedding area or a deep litter system. Now, that only applies for your high intensity sheds. If we're talking about sheds that are down in your paddock, that you just, we have like 4 sheds in different paddocks, and when we move the goats to the different paddocks, there is a shed there that stays in the paddock that's easy for them to access to get out of the rain and out of the sun. So if it's one of those sheds, don't worry about the bedding. And you can put a raised bedding area in there. So you can put a shelf in there. Goats are climbers. They will climb up and go to sleep there. But what we found was because we have more than 2 goats, putting a raised shelf in there resulted in fighting over who was going to get on the raised shelf. There was not enough raised shelf for 20 goats, and so therefore there would be fights over it. If you only have 2 goats, by all means, put a shelf in halfway up. So just some posts in the ground, a piece of pallet across the top. Just make sure that you close up the gaps. It is a good idea to leave some gaps for pebbly pieces of goat poo to fall between, but you don't want their foot to go between it. So you want the gap smaller than their foot could possibly get in, but bigger than what you need for a goat poo to drop down through. And that just makes it a bit easier to keep it clean. So those kind of raised bedding areas are really good in smaller sheds where you've only got a couple of goats. We do put a raised bed in where our kidding stalls are, so where our kids live. So our 2 bottle babies that we've got at the moment, Cream and Cookie and Cream, cookies and cream, no, cookie and cream. We have a raised pallet that the kids actually made. The kids made the pallet up, and they got the handy helper to help them. They cut a piece out of an old trampoline bed that we had that had been absolutely trashed by the goats. They cut a piece out of that and put that over the top of the pallet because we're not so worried about the baby goat poo. And the baby goats are out there at the moment in the sun, lying on this pallet in the sun. They just think it's the duck's nuts. They've got this own bed out in the sun, and it's out of the wind because it's sitting at the front of their shed. Now, you can use a deep litter system, but deep litter systems need cleaning out. And let me tell you, we've done the deep litter method for our chooks in the past. And when it comes time for clean out, it's a little bit of manual labour. So just be prepared for that. If you do go the deep litter method, when it is time to clean it out, for a goat shed, you're going to want a couple of wheelbarrows and some really good shovels. For the chook house, it was not so bad because it's a smaller space and I could do that on my own. But in the goat sheds, whenever we've tried a deep litter method, the handy helper usually has to come in and help me clean it out because there's quite a bit of lifting. Something to muck it out with. Now, what I found was the best thing for cleaning out goat sheds or goat yards that you may have is you go into Kmart. I think they were about $10 at the time. It's a dog poop scooper that is a little metal tray at the bottom. It's probably, I don't know, 20 centimetres across. And it comes with its own little paddle to scrape the poo into the metal shovel end. But it's really easy because you don't have to bend down and pick anything up, and you can walk around really quickly and just quickly scrape poop into the tray, and then I put in the wheelbarrow to go up to the compost. So that's something that's really easy to muck out with. There are other alternatives you can get, and if you had a larger area, and it's something we've looked at, the handy helper's trying to modify his old blower at the moment, leaf blower, because the leaf blower has a suck action on it. Goat pebble poo is so small and it scatters so much because the goats just walk while they're shitting. He's trying to modify it so that I can use it as a sucker instead of a blower and suck up pebbles out of our kidding area, our sick bay and our birthing unit that we've got built, because they all have outdoor areas that are on grass and I want to keep the poop out of that. So yeah, he's trying to modify that at the moment. If you've come up with a system that works better, by all means, post it on social media and link me into it because I'd love to see it. There are other versions. You can get tractor versions and things like that for picking up cow poo and horse poo and things like that. I think horse poo seems to be the one that people are prepared to spend the most amount of money, probably because the animals cost the most amount. So the other thing you need to think about, apart from a sealed-in shed that is very weatherproof, is it's probably worth putting, especially if you live in a hot area, a spot that they can rest in the shade. Now, it doesn't have to have a roof on it. It could have shade cloth. It's not just like, you don't have to think about it from the perspective of stopping the rain getting in. You just need to think about it from the perspective of stopping the sun belting down on them. Some goats handle the heat better than others. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, the Angoras that handle the winter weather and the cold and rain much easier. In summer, they struggle, especially if I've been late with shearing them, they struggle to cope in the heat. So I'm about to shear, it's September here at the moment, and I'm about to shear the 7 that I've got left. And they will then go through the bulk amount of summer without long hair and they'll cope just fine. But you do need to have shade for them, particularly if you live in a really hot environment. Here in Australia, everybody thinks the sun shines 24/7. It doesn't shine 24/7, but we do get some pretty drastic heats in the summer. Where we live, and we're southern Australia, so we're in a colder climate in winter, but in summer we get 40 plus degrees, which is 100 plus degrees for you people on Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit? Yeah, we're on Celsius. I had to think then for a second. I'm so used to converting backwards and forwards between US measurements and Australian and UK measurements. It's, yeah. So, yeah, over 100 degrees. And so you definitely want shade if you're in an area that's over 100 degrees or 40 degrees Celsius. You definitely want to keep shade for them. And it's probably a good idea to then also give them like a pallet or something to get up off the ground too, because that will allow some breeze to flow through underneath them and help keep them cool as well. It also will stop predators that you don't want kind of coming and sitting where the goats are. So our biggest concern here is snakes. In the area that I live, we have tiger snakes, red-bellied black snakes, and brown snakes. And the brown snakes are the killers. Don't get me wrong, the tiger snakes and red-bellied black snakes will kill a goat as well. But the browns tend to be a bit more aggressive, a bit more in your face. Red bellies are very shy, and literally a goat would have to stumble upon them in order to get bitten by a red belly. Tiger snakes can be very aggressive, but they're very reclusive as well. So they tend not to get bitten by them. The only goat that we've lost to a snake bite, we believe it was a brown, because it took him within 20 minutes, he was gone. So those kind of snakes really, they're very aggressive, and their venom is very, very toxic to everything, humans, goats, the whole lot. So you don't need the Taj Mahal of goat palaces for them to be happy. You just need something that is dry, ventilated, and secure for them to get into and get out of the weather, whether it's the sun or the rain. Now, I did talk about weather conditions depending on where you live. And if you are, for my friends that are in the northern parts of the US, where it snows like meters or feet of snow through the winter months, obviously you guys have to think about a whole other different set of considerations, which is that you need a barn more than likely to keep your goats in over the winter months where there is no grazing ability outside. And if that's the case, you also need to think about food supply. And if you've already got livestock anyway and a barn anyway, then you would understand that. If you don't, if there's snow on the ground, there's no grass for goats to eat. So they're going to have to be hand-fed during the months where you have a complete coverage of snow over grass. If you're in an area that's kind of partial snow and grass, I know there's some areas where they get snow, maybe for a month during the middle of the winter, but it defrosts fairly quickly and some grass shoots will come up back through it. You really need to only consider it for those months. Goats are grazers, they're foragers, they will go for trees, so they will go above the grass line to get food. But if everything's frozen, or you're living in an area where all the trees have lost their leaves, then obviously that's not going to be an option for them either. Now, the other thing is the amount of water that you have in the area. We're lucky here, we get really good consistent rain, but we have had a drought for the last year, I guess, and we've just started having rain again, which is awesome, except that we now have to deal with the runoff of water. And it's okay if you have areas where the water's going to run off, that there are certain waterfall areas, that makes it easy. But you need to be aware of those areas so that you don't put housing and yards in the areas of high water kind of containment. We have certain areas where water runs off out of our dams into other dams, runs off out of the hills into our dams. We would never put a shed for an animal in the water path. It just doesn't make any sense. And there's a guy that I follow online who's a long-range weather forecaster, and he always laughs about people saying, oh, this area got this horrible flood and we need to rebuild. And he sits there and goes, well, why did you build a house or a suburb in an entire floodplain? I don't think the urban planners really think about it, but it is a really good idea to do an assessment of your land beforehand and know where water runs off. We've got a section of land through the middle of our milking goat paddock where they stay during the summer months when they're milking. We have a section of land through there that turns into a river as soon as we have 20 mils or more. So as soon as we get a good downfall of rain, it is a river straight through the middle. Now it's fine because it's out in the paddock, it's not in their shed. But if we build a shed in the middle of that paddock, we would not put it in that watercourse because it's just too hard to keep the floor of the shed dry when you've built it over a watercourse. So just take that into consideration when you're thinking about it. You don't want areas where you're going to be sludging through mud to get to a milking bale or to a goat shed to let them out or feed them. You want areas that you can either build up enough to make them really dry, or they're already dry areas and areas that aren't going to get boggy in the rain. Now, fencing. Fencing is the one thing I joke about. I'll try and post it through the week. I've got a meme that I post probably once a year when I remember it about goats and fencing, and it is quite funny. It's essentially a picture of, fencing for horses, and it's this lovely wood picket fence, and then fencing for cows, and it's like this, stranded wire fence with just one strand of electric hanging off the edge of it. And then it's got fences for goat, and it looks like a photo from some American outback prison where they've got, watchtowers with people with guns, and there's like razor wire for like 20 layers. And that's the goat fence. Look, it's not quite that bad, but I have to be honest, do not go into it thinking, I'll just put the same fencing up for cows or horses and that'll cover the goats. It doesn't work like that. Goats are clever. They're climbers, they're jumpers, and they also will get stuck in fencing. So you have to be really careful. And I speak from experience, you don't want to come home and find a dead goat stuck in a fence. I have had that happen twice only ever. And then we scrapped that fencing and dealt with it in a different way and had some different fencing. But the kind of fencing that you need to look at is hinge joint mesh or goat-proof mesh. Now, when they talk about that, usually what they're talking about is square wire mesh. So it will be fencing that a chicken could climb through, a rabbit could climb through, but a dog probably couldn't get through. And the squares usually are smaller at the lower part, close to the ground. And then as the fence climbs up, as you go up the height of the fence, the squares will get slightly bigger. Now, the really important thing to think about that is how big are your goat's heads and their horns, because this is where everybody comes unstuck. And we have fencing down the front. We have one goat only that does it every time. Evelyn, who's one of my Angoras, she always sticks her head through a part of a fence and then twists her head a certain way, and she can't get back out because her horns get trapped. So she actually can't swivel her head around enough to pull her head back through without the horns getting caught on the fence. I think we've probably rescued her about 8 times, and it's another important reason why don't trust your fencing. And I say this all the time, do not trust your fencing 100%. Always do head checks. Morning and night do head checks. A goat can survive for a couple of hours stuck in a fence, but it can't survive for 24 hours. Once you get past that 24-hour mark, it's going to be weak. It's going to be low on its food, low on its water. Goats are ruminant animals. They need to be eating in order to get their rumen working. So the longer they're without food, the more chance you have of having a dead goat. So the really important thing is check morning and night. If you can't check morning and night, have somebody, a neighbour, who can at least stick their head in your paddock and go, yep, I did a head count and there's, 8 goats and they're all walking around, nobody was stuck in a fence. Or put things in place to stop the fence. Now, if you've got a goat that's really problematic, and I'll try and on the YouTube clip of this podcast, I will try and post some photos. You can use a piece of timber, like an old broom handle, and tape it to their horns, which will prevent them being able to get through the gap in the fence. And sometimes they just need that until their horns get a bit bigger or they get a bit bigger and then they can't get their head stuck through. But test it, anything where a goat can get their horns caught, you need to be super conscious and checking all the time, or you need to take action to stop the goat being able to put their head through the fence. Electric fencing. Whoa, electric fencing is fantastic. Like pigs and dogs and horses, goats are very intelligent when it comes to electric fencing. They can sense when an electric fence is on. They can sense when there is a zap going through that line. They can also be very well trained. Pigs are fantastic for it. They can be trained to electric fences, and goats are similar. You put an electric fence in a paddock and there will always be the one goat that is like the goat that gets thrown under the bus, where they send that goat up to the fence to find out if the fence is on. And we've seen it happen. One of the braver boys will go up and stick his nose on the fence, the white strand of electric fence wire, and they piss themselves, they shit themselves, they fart, and they take off down the paddock at a million miles an hour because they've just got zapped on a really sensitive part of their nose on the fence. And if anybody's out there going, CJ, you shouldn't be laughing about this, that poor goat, believe me, those goats have usually caused me a whole bunch of grief before I've electrified a fence. I do it a lot with my kids, the little kids, and the reason I do that is because they are the ones most likely to get tangled in a fence, and I don't want to lose them. I don't want them to die. I'd rather them get a zap from an electric fence than die because they've stuck their horns through a fence and can't get back out. So single strand of electric or 2 strands of electric, depending on the size of your goats. If it's mostly kids or smaller pygmy style goats, you could get away with 1 strand. 2 strand if you've got somebody who's a jumper. And Sage, who's no longer with us, she could clear a fence, no problem. Charlotte, who's half Angora, half Anglo-Nubian, she can jump about 6 feet up in the air onto a surface. So she could clear a fence if she really wanted to. She just chooses not to. But we used to put 2 strands of electric fence around their paddocks. Make sure the fence is working. So get a tester to be able to put up against the fence, unless you're brave and you want to put the back of your hand on the fence. I hate doing that. I hate getting zapped off fences. So we have a tester that we use. Have the fence on, have it well and truly on before you put the goats in there. They are smart animals. Once one of them gets hit by an electric fence, the rest of them will try and avoid that electric fence. And they do get to a point where they see that white ribbon strand of electric fence and they won't go near it at all, even if it's not on. So we have utilised it by leaving the strand of electric fencing on in paddocks, even though the fence has long since been turned off, and they still won't go near the strand of ribbon where they think it's electrified. They remember what it was like and they're not going near it. And even if they didn't get zapped, they remember that somebody else got zapped and they don't go anywhere near it. Now, one really important thing that a lot of smaller farms don't think about is walk your fence area that you're going to have your goats in, and make sure that there is nothing else, not the fencing kind of side of things, but make sure there's nothing in the paddock that a goat can climb up onto that is near a fence. Believe me, I have seen Charlotte jump up onto the back of a metal trailer, so a box trailer that was closed in, and she jumped onto the roof of the trailer in the paddock, and then from the roof of the trailer jumped over the fence. So, and we didn't even have the trailer that close to the fence. There was probably a good metre between the fence and the trailer, but that was good enough. That was close enough. She was able to jump straight out of the paddock. So anything at all that they can climb on to jump over the fence, you want to clear that away from the fence. And I would say, depending on whether they're really good jumpers, you want it about 3 metres from the fence if you can. Like, you want it a fair distance. Like I say, Charlotte jumped from the roof of a trailer a metre and still cleared the fence. So, but also anything they can wedge their horns on that's near the fence. You don't want them getting stuck between, like trying to get at a tree or anything like that, and have their horns get stuck near a fence where they then can't back themselves out or climb out or anything like that. So walk around and check the fence area and make sure that there is nothing that they can get their horns stuck in if they're still horned. Make sure there's nothing that they can get wedged in between. Baby goats will wedge themselves between 2 solid objects so quickly, and then they just scream for help because they can't back out. They don't realise to back out. And anything that they can climb over. Now, you can have trees next to the fence, no problem, so long as they're not big, broad oaks or something like that they're going to be able to climb up the tree. If you've ever seen African goats, goats are great climbers. Not all of them are. Some of them are really shit climbers, but most of them could climb up a large tree without a problem. If there is a way that they can get out of that paddock through climbing through a fence, they absolutely will find it. So I would say if you put them into a new fenced area, stand back, watch, go and make yourself a cup of tea, come back out, sit in a deck chair and watch them. They will find a gap if it is there. Okay, gates and paddock design. So latch types, goats are really clever. Poppy opened the gate to the kidding paddock literally 24 hours after we put her in there. She just got up and rubbed on the chain until it unlatched and then pushed the gate open. So we've had to double latch it now. So she's not real happy, but she hasn't been able to get out since. But any latches that a goat can kind of just push on and push it out of the hook. So you want the child-proof ones that have the ring so that when you slide your little U-shape into the hole, the ring holds it and stops it from being flicked back out by an animal. Some goats get really clever and can slide bolts across, so you really want D shackles that hold it. You want the child-proof ones, like I just said, with the ring underneath them. If it's a bolt, you want to make sure when you bolt it across that you drop it down right up flush against the gate. If it's sticking up and they can just push it back, they'll find a way. don't think they're not smart enough, because they absolutely are smart enough. I've seen goats do things that it's on par with dogs. So how many paddocks do you really need? If you're on 2 to 5 acres and you only have 2 goats, what I would suggest to you is you can have one big main paddock, and then my preference there would be then to run a couple of electric strands and section parts of that paddock off. So strip graze, essentially. If you're not sure what strip grazing is, look it up, strip grazing. Essentially strip graze them from one side of the paddock to the other with electric fence, and then just move that electric fence every other week kind of thing. Now, if you can rotational graze, so if you have fixed fencing where you can put them into different paddocks, things like Barber's poleworm need about 6 weeks in the dead of summer to die. So to clear a paddock of parasite loads, you're going to need about a 6-week gap. If you can have 4 paddocks where you rotate them through literally every 2 weeks, or even if you can stretch it out to 2.5, 3 weeks, that would definitely clear it. That means by the time they get back to their first paddock, it's been 6+ weeks since they were in that paddock last. So 4 paddocks would be ideal. 5 or 6 paddocks would be magic. You would never have to worry about parasite. Well, no, I should say you'd never have to worry about parasite loads, but parasite loads would really be a non-concern for you if you do everything right and you're rotating them through those paddocks and resting the paddocks in between and not putting other livestock in that could drop parasite loads. You can run chickens through after goats, and they don't share the same parasites, so that makes it a really good situation. So rotational grazing is the best. But if you can't do that, and certainly with our milking paddock, we don't rotationally graze through it. We've always just dumped them in there for the milking season. What we have found is that we've had problems with Barber's poleworm, so now we are strip grazing them within that paddock, where we only allow them access to certain areas, and the rest of the paddock is rested in between. And then by the time they get all the way through and back to where they started, it's been about 6 weeks. So the next one, and I think it's my last one, yes it is, protecting goats from predators. So we're very lucky here. We have a Merrimer dog, a livestock guardian dog, who lives in the paddock with the chickens, where our pasture-raised chickens are, and that paddock runs parallel to our goat paddock that we use for our milking goats. Goats, especially adult goats with horns, it is very rare that a predator will be able to take them on. And when I say rare, it's not impossible. It's not, never going to happen. If it's a sick goat, there's more chance of a predator getting it. Pests like snakes will attack a goat that treads on them, so they'll bite them. So that can kill a goat. But an actual predator, so for us here in Australia, foxes, domestic and wild dogs, and wedge-tailed eagles. They're probably the only real solid predators that we have in most farming areas. In the States, you guys would have bears and bobcats and all the hoo-ha, and I'm sure there's a couple of those other animals like raccoons and stuff like that would probably do damage to a baby goat given the opportunity. But the main ones for us are dogs, foxes, and wedge-tailed eagles. Now, wedge-tailed eagles get a lot of blame where it's not always due. Wedgies will only take a sick or dying kid. They generally will not attack an adult goat because the adult goat is so big, and wedge-tails aren't stupid. But a sick or dying kid is fair game for most predators. So you really don't want kids out in the paddock, and this is why I bring them into a kidding paddock at least for the first couple of weeks until I know they're strong enough, their legs are working, they're drinking well off mum, they understand the concept of fear. So with baby goats, same as with baby lambs, they have a fear response. If you do a loud clap or bang or drop something near them, or an animal like a predator, like the first time they usually meet the Merrimer dog, comes bounding over to them, they will drop and go flat to the ground. Literally, they look like they're dead. They just flat to the ground, face down. They drop their head down really low, their legs splay out. And that is their fear response. That is an inbuilt natural instinct for them. And they will do that if they think something's coming near them. So you want to make sure they've got the fear response. And you can do that just by making a loud sound around them. Some goats have it stronger than others. Out of Cookies and Cream, we've not seen Cookie do it at this point. Cream absolutely has the fear response and drops flat to the ground and makes herself a completely low profile. But For us, the biggest fear is foxes and dogs. Now, we have a Merrimer who patrols the property and drops her poop all along the fence line, and the foxes, we've never had a fox come into our milking paddock because of that. Before we had Luna, when we lived at Gunning, we had domestic dogs come in and attack our chickens. They never went near the goats, and I think it was because both mum goats had horns and they're quite big goats. Yeah, they're Anglo-Nubians. They're not small goats. It's not easy pickings kind of thing. But you do need to be mindful if there are domestic dogs or foxes in your area. You need to make sure that you have an area where the goats can get to, near to where you can see where a dog would be put off by human presence. Or have a Marama, or make sure that you have adult goats in the paddock that are horned that would likely defend any of the younger goats against any kind of predator. It's something, it depends on the area that you live in, but you'll know what pests are in your area. If you don't know, go to your neighbours. If you've just moved out to a rural area and you don't know, go and speak to your neighbours. In the States, I know there's so many more pests and predators than what we get here. We have the savage, nasty snakes and things like that, but we don't have the raccoons and I think they're called opossums. We get possums, but our possums, well, they'd damage us, but they wouldn't go and damage a goat intentionally. But you guys have eagles and things like that. We have kites and stuff like that, but they're more after small rodents. They're not going to go for a baby kid unless it's very, very sick. Now, the other option, if you're in an area where there are a heavy predator load, is to make sure that you have a fenced area that you can lock your goats into overnight, because most predators are going to try and attack overnight. That's when they're at their most active. So being able to lock your goats into a barn or into a shed, things like that. Our kids always get locked away. If they're not with their mum in the kidding paddock, they get locked away overnight time into a completely predator-proof shed, and the Merrimer also guards that shed area. So the kids really can't be got at by any kind of predator. Now, a couple other things that you might want to consider, depending on how big your property is and how much space you've got, is keeping your shelter close to where food and water supplies are. So if you have I still refer to our feed shed as a tack shed. So for horsey people out there, you would know that a tack shed is where we keep horse food. I refer to it as a tack shed even for our goats and chicken feed and all that kind of stuff. Everything's kept in the tack shed. But we have water supply near to the shed. We have water supply into our kidding, kid paddock and our sick bay area. We have a water supply that goes into there that's easily refilled, and that we can easily check on. We don't have to kind of walk halfway across a paddock to check that there's water in there. We don't have our gravity feed system set up yet, but that's what we're working on this summer, having a gravity feed system so the water will never ever run out, because it'll have a float in it, which fills it up as soon as it runs low. Having a separate area for kidding or sick bay is a really, really good idea. If you have a sick goat, you don't want it in the same shed as your other goats, just until you know what the sickness is and what you need to be doing to fix it. But also, too, goats are nasty. If you've got a sick goat, they will pick on it. Poor old Elmo, when he was coming down with his pink eye that he had a month ago, the other goats were barreling him and knocking him over because he was half blind and he couldn't see. And then I realised what it was, dragged him out. Luckily, it was not the contagious pink eye, so it didn't go through the rest of the herd. But the poor bugger, we dragged him out, treated him for the pink eye. He didn't want to go back in the paddock. He was like, I'm loving this sick bay area. Like, I can sit and relax and nobody's picking on me, and I get food brought to me and there's water right there. He didn't want to go. So you do have to have, or you don't have to have a separate area, but my God, it makes it so much easier if you have a separate area for sick animals, a separate area for kidding. You don't want all the goats in with a new mum that's kidding. They take a little while to bond, especially new mums. But also, too, goats are nasty to each other. I showed great-grandma Hazel, her great-grandchildren, who are Cookie and Cream, and she tried to headbutt them through the fence. You know, it's just it's a goat thing. If you've not seen goats around other people's kids, if it's not their kids, even if it is their kids, they'll still headbutt them. But if it's not their kids, they will absolutely headbutt them and knock them over, and they don't even think about it. Like, it's nasty. So you definitely want separate areas to be able to keep them until everybody's settled and the kids know to avoid certain cranky grandmothers like Hazel, but also to easy access. So anybody that's used to a permaculture kind of setup, I refer to it as like the zone 2 for me in permaculture terms. I want to be able to get out to the kidding paddock, the sick bay and the kid paddock and shed. I want to be able to get out to them quickly. Also, my milking barn area is a 2-minute walk literally from the back step. And I don't have it right next to the back step because I don't want to listen to goats bleeding all night, but I do want it close enough so that I can get there really quickly if I have to deal with any kind of emergencies. So you want it closer rather than further away. And if you live in an area where the weather is shit, where you're dealing with snow and stuff like that, I've seen videos of you poor guys in the north of America trudging through meters of snow to get to a barn. Obviously, you want to be able to get easily from the house to the barn when the weather is inclement like that. You don't want to be struggling through with, buckets of water and hand feed to get out there. You want everything where it's close and easy to move it around. It's easier for you, which means you're more likely to look after them better, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's it for fencing and shelter. So hopefully that's answered a few questions. Goats can climb out of just about anything. It's not a fallacy. People say goats eat everything. Goats do not eat everything, believe me. I've got fussy goats who turn their nose up all the time. The jokes that they talk about with fencing, believe every single one of them. Goats will climb out of anything. They will find a gap anywhere there is a gap, and they will show up your insufficiencies in fencing anytime you leave them there. Anyway, that's it for this week. Hopefully, I'm going to do a double recording today because I've got a whole bunch of stuff on over the next fortnight. So the next episode that I record, we probably won't have any news about Poppy and her babies, but keep an eye out on the socials. As soon as she has them, I will post. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll talk to you all next week. Bye for now.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.